Well, thanks very much for the introduction. I think I was pleased to be invited here this evening and very honoured, because I think the work that you do is very important, encouraging young engineers into work. I'm a passionate engineer. I've always loved engineering, and I couldn't wait to leave school at 16 to do an engineering apprenticeship. I was very interested in cars. Sports cars in particular, because there was a very nice looking girl at the top of the road where I stayed, and her boyfriend had a nice sports car, and I thought, if you want a nice girl like that, you got to get a nice sports car. So it started me thinking about how to get a nice sports car, and I was really interested in how to fix things as well. So I left school at 16 and did an engineering apprenticeship. I did 4 years, and then I couldn't get into the higher national or ordinary national certificate because I didn't have enough qualifications. So I had to do City and Guilds, which was very practical, then ordinary national, and then higher national. And I was doing day release and night school. And after 6 years, I decided to go to university. And I chose a degree in technology and business studies. And that allowed me to do business studies alongside my engineering qualifications. And that was important to me because in the company I was in, Weir Pumps, a well-known engineering company in Glasgow, the people who were running it were accountants and financial people. And I thought, you know, if I'm going to rise up this organization, I need to get some understanding of finance and business. So I chose this bachelor's degree in technology and business studies, and you could do the engineering alongside accountancy, economics, marketing, and it was perfect combination for me. So I did that for 4 years full time. When I told my mother that I was going to university, she asked me why. She said, "Keep your feet on the ground, son. You're making more than your father. You've got a good trade. Be content with what you've got." But I was keen to go to university and to do this bachelor's degree, which I did over 4 years. I went back to work in Weir Pumps, the company that I'd served my apprenticeship in, and I continued a part-time MBA, and that was 3 hours on a Tuesday night and 3 hours on a Thursday night after work, and did that for 3 years, and I got my MBA. And then when I finished that, I felt there was a bit of too much spare time, so I did a second master's degree in international finance and accounting for another 3 years at Glasgow University. And I think this was just to make up for a chip I had on my shoulder about not having a good education or leaving school too early. But at that time, I was still keen on rising up in an engineering business, and I went back to work for my old company and went straight into a junior management position. And because of my practical experience and my education, I was able to miss out the graduate traineeship so I could get a good wage. And again, I made quite good progress in there rising up through the company, but I was keen to get higher, and the people above me didn't look as if they were going to be moving anytime soon. So I moved job, and I went to work in a senior management position in an American-owned engineering company. And after being there for a few years, I was approached by Coopers & Lybrand to go into what they called corporate care. And this was going into industrial companies, engineering companies that were in trouble, as a consultant, a senior consultant, and coming up with a plan to turn them around and to make them profitable again. Most of these companies were almost insolvent, and I enjoyed this work because it was usually fairly simple. Because I had served my apprenticeship, I was used to working with people on the shop floor. I would walk about and talk to the people on the shop floor and ask them what was wrong, and they gave me the answers, and then I would go up and make the changes, and it all worked. The problem was that the management had separated themselves too often from the people who knew what was going on in the company. And I was quite keen to get into a business of my own. into my own business and grow it, own my own business, but I had no money. I came from a fairly poor family. We stayed in council accommodation, so I didn't have any money that I could get from a family to do this. So I decided to leave Coopers and Lybrand and go self-employed. And I spoke to some banks and private equity firms and said, look, would you use me, or do you need to have the brand of Coopers and Lybrand? And they said, no, we've worked with you, we've got work we can give you. And I said, I want to take a small fee, but a share of the upside. All I needed was enough to feed me, put petrol in my car, have a few beers at the weekend and a fish supper, and that was enough for me. So I took a very small fee, but a share of the upside, because I was confident that I could make an improvement and that would get me more than just a high fee. And that worked very well for me. And my last assignment was up here in Aberdeen, and it was a company in oilfield services, and it was at a time similar to the time we're in just now. It was in the 90s, where there was a downturn and we were at a downward part in the cycle. The company had lost 15 million for 2 years running, and it was about to go bust. Now I went in, came up with a plan to turn it round, and we did that fairly quickly. But whilst I was in there, there was a big change in the way I approached things. There was a kind of wake-up moment, a really important event that made me think differently and raise my sights. And that was when I was working in there, and we had turned the business round, and I was getting a share of the upside, and the upside was very good each year. We had just moved into a new house, my wife and I, and we had spent a lot of money on it, doing it up. And I noticed that there was this big house that I used to cycle past when I was a wee boy. And I'd look in and I'd see the owner going in his chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce and up his driveway, and I could never see the house, and I was always intrigued. So it was up for sale, and I thought, I'm going to go up and see that, because I always wanted to see it. So I told my wife, and she said, don't be stupid, we've spent a lot of money, don't waste your time, we're not buying another house. So I went up anyway, and there was a lovely brochure, coloured brochure, very expensive brochure, because no way could I afford this house, there was no way I could do it. And I came back down, I left the brochure on the kitchen worktop, because I knew she would look at it, and then I said, I'm going back up at the weekend for a second look. And she said, well, I'll come with you, just out of interest, but we're not buying this, okay? So we went up the second time, and I made a decision that I was going to see how I could buy this house. And I went back home and I worked out, and this was 3 months into the financial year up at Hunting, the company I was running in Aberdeen. 3 months into the year, we had already set the budget for the year, and I worked out what we would need to do for the upside to be enough at the end of that year to give me enough money to buy that house. And it was like 2.5 or 3 times what the budget was we had to go for. So I sat all weekend thinking about what we needed to do here. What could I do to make this happen? And I decided that I would go back up and see the seller of the house and tell them that I wanted to buy it, but I needed 10 months entry date. And he said, that's fantastic, because I'm moving to Australia and I haven't looked at a house there. Now I can go and look, and I've got plenty of time, I've got 10 months. I then went up to Aberdeen on the Monday, and I got the team in and I said, look, I've been looking at the market and what we can do in this business and going over the plan, and there's so much more opportunity than we thought, and I know we don't normally change budgets, but this year we're going to make an exception, and here's the new budget. And they all looked at me as if I was stupid. At the end of that year, every day I was going through this house. By that time I'd taken up meditation, so in the morning I would go through in my mind, I would meditate before I got up, and I would go through the house, because I had been through the house several times. I would feel the wood paneling, I could feel the leather sofas. So I did this every morning before going to work. I did it at night before I went to sleep, every day before I moved into that house. And I also went over what we had to do in the company, what we had to do, the actions we had to take to move us forward. And at the end of that year, we beat that new budget and I bought the house. But what it taught me was I would have been quite happy. I would have been satisfied with a budget and an upside that year that was quite a bit less. It was about 40% of what we eventually did. And it taught me that very often we don't think big enough. We're constrained by our minds. And if you've got a compelling vision and something you need to do, you will absolutely focus on it and you'll get it done. And I think we've all got an awful lot more potential than we realize. Now, I think you've got, about effective leadership. Why is effective leadership vital in the current climate? It's not just vital in the current climate, it's vital all the time, but particularly in the current climate, because you've got to have a clear vision of what you're aiming for. And that's what I had created. I had to do that to allow me to buy this house. So you've got to have a clear vision, and that's something that I've done in all the businesses that we've bought into. Establish a clear vision, and I always do. I'm really intensive and forensic about analysing the market opportunity, the addressable market for the products or the services that we've got, and then working out back from that, what share do we have in the company, and what would be reasonable for us to grow to. And it's always much more than where you are plus a few percent. And so the vision comes from real detailed analysis of the opportunity and not being constrained in your mind by being scared because it's such a big opportunity. I think that very often we think, well, yeah, that theoretically that's there, but it's not going to happen. I remember one of my colleagues early on, a CEO that was working with me, saying, Jim, the difference between you and me is you can dream and have a vision. I've got to deal with reality. And I said to him, well, what do you think reality is? The way you're saying that, reality are constraints that people have put around. You're prepared to accept and constrain yourself with other people's thoughts about what you can do. You make your own reality. Now, we parted company because we couldn't agree on whose reality was right, and mine worked out at the end. So, I think it's very important to have this compelling vision, but built from some real detailed analysis of the opportunity, not just plucked out the air. Although I did pluck the number out there for my house, but I went and then did the analysis of can we get there? Can we realistically get there? And I thought we could, and went for it. And I think the qualities that you need in an inspiring, an aspiring leader needs to be able to think big. And it's something that we ram into all of the people that we work with. Think big, do the analysis, and don't be scared by the opportunity. And think big, and then work back and work out what you need to do about it. Have a compelling vision. And what we've done in all the businesses that we've bought into is we do a storyboard. And this is just a big board at the beginning, which is saying where we want to go, and then mapping out all the steps we have to do to get there in a picture form. And we have it all over the office, all over the factories. I was very fortunate. In 2007, I saw the company that I'd served my apprenticeship in was going to be sold to Sulzer in the US, in Zurich. And they were going to close it down. Now, this was a factory that made world-leading pumps based in Scotland that had been there for over 100 years, and it was just going to be closed down, 550 people losing their job. So I muscled in and managed to buy the business. And I bought it, and it was a great feeling going in there, because the chairman at the time when I was there was Lord Weir, and I could never get up into their office floor and see his office. And I moved into his office when I bought the company. Now, when I bought it, I paid 45 million for it. And I then set out this vision with the team. Now, these are people that were going to lose their job, and they were all demotivated. And, you know, I gave them the speech, all 550. I saw them 50 at a time. Here's where we're going. And I could see the look in their face. Yeah, we've heard it all before. And I had to keep doing it repeatedly to them. And eventually, and we had these vision boards up everywhere. We kept updating them. And they could see that we were doing what it said we would do. Just integrity is another issue that I'd like to touch on, because when I was giving these talks, the workforce, there was always someone in the workforce said, when are you going to look at our wages? And my first impression was, look, I've just saved the business and your job. Please give me a break and let me get on with doing something. But the third time they asked me, I said, look, I can't promise I'll do anything, but I promise you I'll look at it. And when I looked at it, they were getting paid 17.5% less than Wood Group or BAE Systems or the people round about, Rolls-Royce. So I told the managing director to put their wages up by 17.5%. And he said, well, we don't need to. We can do it over 2 years. We don't need to do it all at once. We can phase it in. And I said, no, you need to do it all at once. You're lucky they're not claiming it backdated, because you've been underpaying them for too long. So he did it, and he came to me and said, you need to change my bonus arrangement because you've just upped my costs. And I told him to get lost. Now, he did, he left. But at the end of that year, we beat the budget, even with the higher cost base. And that was a factor that the workforce saw, that we were communicating, we were doing what we said we'd do, and we honoured the pay increase. And that's something you can't do in spreadsheets. Accountants will tell you it's a cost, but you can't underestimate the power of the human spirit when people are motivated, they're happy at their work, they trust you, and the productivity just shot up. And that's what delivered the additional performance. Now, I told everyone, that it was my skills that increased this, of course, that it was all the things I did. Nothing to do with that. It was all down to the motivation of the workforce. Now, over a 3-year period, we bought this business in 2007. 2008, we had Lehman Brothers collapse and then the banking crisis. We had bank debt in, we were under pressure from the banks. And they had put people in to do their special report, because we had breached covenants. And that could easily have gone the wrong way. I told the bank that I wasn't accepting the accountancy report on it. It was nonsense, and I would redo the report and tell them what it was. And they weren't used to that, and they weren't accepting of it at first, but eventually they did accept it. Now, we sold that business in 2011, 4 years after I bought it, having invested a further 45 million, so I had 90 million invested in it, and I sold it for 500 million in 2011. And when we sold it, we had 960 employees, not 550. And we still had the factory there. The place was buzzing, and we retained this business as an iconic engineering business in Scotland. And I think it's something that's happened that is it's a crime across the UK. We've had so many good engineering businesses that have been allowed to go down because they don't have good leadership. People don't invest in them. You haven't had the trust in the people that are working there and good communication. And I now love those businesses because I love to buy them and then come in with a plan to turn them around again. You know, just another story on the integrity. We were, in 2008, raising a fund, and I went on to raising a private equity fund because when we were building our business during the 90s, I had it in the stock market, and I'd been taught on my MAC, my Masters in Accounting, about efficient market theory. But I then found out at the end of the 90s, when we had the Southeast Asian financial crisis, the share price of the company went way down to 25% of what it had been 3 months earlier, and the business was performing 40% better than it was the previous year. So the market was dysfunctional. It was undervaluing it, and I couldn't do anything to go out and raise more capital or grow the business because it was so undervalued. So I took the company private, and since then I've taken a couple of companies onto the AIM market, and the same thing happened. When we came to a downturn, share price gets undervalued. One I sold, its share price had gone to 18p, and because I still had the majority shareholding, although it was listed, I sold it for 83p a share. So, you know, that's a huge dysfunction in the market. And then a second one that I'd listed, and the same thing happened. I sold it and got 3 times what the market price was for it. So I decided the stock market's a waste of time. And what I need to do is raise a private equity fund to have access to the capital even when the markets go down. And it's in times when the cycle's down that good opportunities come up. And you need to invest in the businesses you've got. That's the time to make investments, to improve the business. And you've got to have faith to be able to do that. But when we were buying, we'd taken the company private, and we'd raised the fund, and we were raising the first fund, and we raised it we closed the first fund 3 days before Lehman Brothers collapsed. And we were buying a business from Textron in the US, and it was $1 billion deal. And there were 4 businesses in there. And I had raised some funds, and one of my funders had said, you need to go back and ask them to drop the price by 50 million. And I said I wouldn't do it because my pitch to the seller, the vice president in Textron in the US, was, look, you're going to get other people interested in this business, and they'll give you a price, but they'll come in and do due diligence, and they'll then chip away at your price with things they find. If we give you a price, we'll stick with it. And if we find, we'll do the diligence. It's confirmatory diligence. It's not to try and push the price down. So I couldn't go back to him and say, I need to knock 50 million off the price. So what the investor said to me was, if you're not going to do that, we're going to withdraw 50 million. So 2 weeks before the deal was to be completed, I was 50 million short. And all my colleagues were saying, well, you know, that's it. We tried hard, we can't do it. I made a visit over to the US to speak to the vice president. I told him the story. I said, I gave you a promise that we wouldn't reduce the price. I said, but I do need you to give me a 50 million loan note, and I'll pay you back within the next 2 years. And there was a long silence that seemed like forever. And then he said, okay, I'll do it. And we paid him back his 50 million within 2 years. And I think it's important that you have principles and you stick by them, and you don't try, you know, to exploit people when there are opportunities to do it, because I think it'll just come back and bite you. And it's important, I think, I would rather have lost the deal than be known for someone that, you know, did a cheap shot like that, promised them something, and then went back in my word. So, you know, I think integrity is important in everything you do, and I've found that when you do that, good things happen to you. You know, we think big. The qualities that I think we need in aspiring leaders is this ability to think big, to have real integrity, have your compelling vision that you've built up from real intelligence gathering, an unshakable belief in what you're doing once you've done all of this. That's what I had in buying this house. I had an unshakable belief that I was going to do this. And you've seen recently, Donald Trump had an unshakable belief that he was going to be president, and it worked. There's the proof. A positive can-do attitude. You know, you really need to have that and never give up. You know, things happen, bad things happen, but it's not a failure. You know, it's just a signal to you to say, look, what do we need to do now to achieve the goal? And you'll find a way to do it. And I think too many people give up at the first or the second hurdle. And it's very important, I think, to have this unshakable belief and to have a positive attitude and never give up on your goal. You know, I think the business education that I've had was very important, adjunct to my engineering experience, and I think it would be good if engineering degrees incorporated more business. Now, the answer I get from universities when I push it is it's the institutes that say that contaminates the degree. You know, if you start doing these arty-farty type things like business, they want you to be doing just the engineering modules to get your institute membership. And we need to make some space, I think, for the business studies and, you know, the interdisciplinary studies, because that's what links it all together. And, you know, I think it's very important in that some degrees are doing that now, and I know that the engineering degrees, it's very intensive. I was glad that I didn't do a pure engineering degree after my HNC, because the guys that did that never had any time to go to the beer bar or socialise or anything. They were just so busy. We had some time off, but I think I benefited greatly from that business input. So, you know, I'm really pleased with the activity that's going on here to try and encourage people into engineering. I think you're doing a great job, and I wish you very well in the future. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody's got any. Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's not always easy to spot. I was speaking to someone earlier about this. You know, I believe that all of the experience you have through the apprenticeship I did, and then all the academic studies, it goes in, and then you get this ability, this kind of gut feel. You know what to do, and I think it comes from all the knowledge that you've stored in there. You're drawing it subconsciously, but you wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't do the work. You know, so I think it's the experience in your education that gives you the ability to pull these things out and have the gut feel to do something. And there is one very practical example, I think, of how my MBA helped. When I bought into Clyde Blowers in 1992, it was a small company, the smallest of 8 in the world doing what it did. It had 3% share of the world market, and it had 7 competitors. So I had learned about consolidation of businesses in my MBA. So I thought, well, you know, this has got 3% market share. I'd like to take it to maybe 10 or 15. I went out and did a lot of research on all the competitors. Who were they? I went to speak to them all to tell them that I thought there was room for some consolidation in this market, and, you know, it'd be good if our companies could come together. I never tried to say that we wanted to buy them, because that's kind of hostile and aggressive. You know, I'd say, look, our businesses look as if they're kind of complementary and a good fit. Now, I bought over a 5-year period 7 of the 8. So I ended up with 60% share of the world market and 1 competitor from having 7 competitors and 3% share of the world market. And that was using my MBA model, maybe a bit naively, because I didn't think it could go wrong. I just rolled out the textbook consolidation exercise. So I think it does help you, but it's not always obvious that you can say, I did this because of the learning that I had in this degree. I think it's all in there and it comes out.
Thank you, Jim. Personally inspired by all what you said, coming from the background as apprentice to businessman. As you can see, the audience here are mostly black people, African black engineers. What do you think is the greatest challenge in facing in Scotland? People relying on tools to establish our own business. Do you think you had a chance, and how do you feel about the challenges as a businessman?
I'm not quite sure of your exact question. Is it because you're black that you're asking me, or because?
I want to put this in perspective because a lot of us here have business ideas. Some of us have already started doing something. We are engineers as we know. But if we want to define the odds to go the way you have gone by acquiring companies and doing business, do you really think you have a chance here in Scotland?
Absolutely. I mean, it's down to your ambition, your focus, your vision, and your drive. That's all. I mean, I think you're lucky that you chose Scotland, because Scottish people are very kind of open. You find when you go abroad, Scottish people kind of melt into the environment. The local community. If the Irish go over, they set up an Irish society, and they all stick together. But the Scots just disappear because they get on with everyone. And I think one of the strengths we've had, or I've had personally, I always felt when I went overseas to visit other companies that they were smarter than us. So, I was over there to learn and pick things up from them. And I think that worked, because some other races are a bit more arrogant. They'll go over. Any Americans in the audience? No. And it's only some, not all. Where they go over and they think, well, we're the guys with all the knowledge, we'll tell you what to do. And I've found that, by going over to and being open-minded, which I think most Scots are, because we've got this kind of inferiority complex, and I think we just kind of mix in with everyone. I don't think it makes a blind bit of difference, really.
Thanks for your overview, Jim. Just a question around troubleshooting. Like in the early days when you acquired your first businesses, how do you go about troubleshooting to know where key issues were in order to make a change and see growth and so on? Probably talk about that.
Yeah, well, I can give you a couple of examples. I mean, one of my jobs in Coopers and Lybrand was in a factory, because I was in as an engineer, and my CV was I was a specialist in engineering and industrial businesses. But when you go into these consultancies, if there's not an assignment like that, they ask you to rewrite your CV to suit the assignment they've got. So there was a factory in Scotland that made jam, cooking chocolate, and beetroot, I think it was. And it was losing money. So I went in and kind of analysed a skill that I kind of adopt is try and look at the products and do a P&L for each product. Now, people tell you there are overheads that you can't assign to the particular product, because you need them there across the business. But you can make a judgment, and it'll quite often jump out at you that there's something that's really a big loss maker. And this particular year, the beetroot crop was bad, and beetroot was high in price, and the farmer, the people who were doing the jam and all of this, they went out and bought beetroot in at a high price and then sold to the supermarkets at the price they were always selling at, just because that's what they always did. And in the jam, when I looked at that, they had the kind of big pots of jam, and then they did those little things for the airlines and for hotels. And those little ones had huge profitability. So I told them to make more of those and less of the big ones, and not to, in future, don't sell beetroot if it's costing you more than you're selling it for. So it was simple. It was more about the financial, the profitability of each product. But sometimes it's common sense. 2 years ago, I bought the last commercial shipyard in the River Clyde out of administration. I just thought, again, like an iconic engineering industry, we've lost all our shipbuilding. There used to be 40 yards on the River Clyde, and this was the last commercial yard. And it went into administration. I had 70 employees pre-administration, and they were all paid off. I think there were 5 left when we took it over. Now we have 310 employees in there to do 2 years later. And we had to do a lot of improvements to the yard. But when I went in to look at how they were building the first order we got, the ship's hull, they do it in segments, and then you take it out onto the slipway and you weld them all together. But I noticed that they were stitch welding this in the middle, and I said, why are you doing that? And he said, we cut it in 2 after we set it all up like this, and then we take it outside and we weld it together again. And I said, well, why do you do that? He said, the crane in here has been up since 1910, and it's been derated several times, so it can only lift half that. So that's why we cut it in 2. I said, well, why don't you get a new crane? So we then we continued talking, and I said, okay, we'll get the crane people out and we'll get a crane. So what weight do we need it to lift? I said, you're making this section, and it was like 5 meters. I said, if we do it 10 meters or 20 meters, then we don't have so much work to do outside. He said, we can't do that. The door's too narrow to get it out. So, sometimes it's simple common sense things, but you need to walk down and see what they're doing. You can't sit in an office and look at finances and work out what they're doing, So I think it's just getting down there and understanding what's going on.
We'll just take one more question.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan. The question for you is, on the career path, do you have any mentors around you? And what do you feel comfortable with certain mentors?
Well, I really don't have a mentor. And the reason I don't is I think, and when people come to ask me, talk to me about their business and say, what do you think I should do? I tell them, you know what to do better than me. And the technique that I've developed for this is meditation. The answer's in there. Sometimes you might not trust yourself or whatever, but so I spent quite a bit of time. I've got a full library of positive motivational books, visual rehearsal, all of that kind of stuff, and meditation. And you wonder, are you doing this right? Because it feels silly sometimes. So I decided to go to Thailand and spend 2 weeks with 2 Buddhist monks to find out how they did it. And they both had different styles. But the result at the end of the day was it's whatever works for you. And I use a wee bit of what they did. So whenever I've got a problem, my mentor is inside me or out there somewhere communicating to me when I'm meditating. and I always get the answer. So go and meditate. You know?